What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down the results of the most recent Treasure Tournament, which was held in the YGO from Zero Discord. Now, all this coverage is coming from the Format Library website, but I'm going to try and mix up my presentation rather than just scrolling up and down a page. Hopefully this is a bit more organized than it normally is. But I will leave a link to the Format Library breakdown for the event for those who are interested in the description. But let's just dive in to what this tournament showed about the metagame, because I think it was pretty interesting. So first off, with the deck type representations, what people brought, there were 22 players in the tournament, which is a pretty big turnout, especially compared to the last Treasure Tournament. And there was a wide variety of decks. Now, of course, the most popular deck was the sort of tomato control list, which is just the general term for good stuff that Format Library uses to classify these lists, as they are playing 3 copies of tomato, and they are sort of controlling. So, that's tomato control. So that was the most popular deck, with half of the players playing that sort of deck in one variation or another. But there were some other decks that did see play. Recruiter Control, which is, I think, just any deck that basically played more than one recruiter. So, Mystic Tomatoes plus either Giant Rat or Mother Grizzly or etc. That actually had 4 people playing it, and that is a pretty sizable amount. And one of those decks actually did manage to go on and win the event. Although the creator of that deck didn't actually classify it as recruiter control, but I'll get to what they call it when I cover that deck. But so that shows that, the good stuff deck that we normally think of it as is not unbeatable in this format, and there are decks that can challenge it. Some other very interesting decks that saw play were Relinquished. 2 people were on Relinquished, and one of them actually made it into the top 4 of people in the event, and that's really awesome to see. Relinquished is a really cool deck. It did make it to the finals of the Imperial tournament that we held a while back. So, in these old formats, people have been experimenting with it and showing that it can do pretty well. But this shows that it can be done well in Treasure as well, and that's really cool to see, as Relinquished is just such a cool deck, and I think that more people should experiment with it, as it's clearly got some legs. Burn, unfortunately, didn't do as well this tournament. It did win the last tournament, so I do still think it's a very good deck. It just is also a very tricky deck, tough deck to pilot. Also, people were likely more prepared for Burn this time, given that it won last event, so they were more prepared in the side deck and just in their playstyles. So Burn probably had a bit more of an uphill battle than it did last time. But still a very cool deck, still I think a very threatening deck in the metagame, and I'm sure it will see more play in the future. There were also some other lists. Clown Control, I played that, and the deck, underperformed based on my expectations. I still think the deck is pretty good, probably like a tier 2 deck. But I think that playing things like Crash Clown is not really the way to go with the deck, and, playing this tournament really helped me realize that. So I still do encourage people to experiment with the deck, but I don't think it's necessarily the best. There was also a Soul Control list and an Equip Aggro list as well, both of which were very interesting. Unfortunately, neither of which did the best in the tournament, but there's still interesting strategies to experiment with, and so I hope people try that out in the future. So that's the main deck breakdown. And now that we've covered that, let's dive into the topping list. So because there are only 22 people in this tournament, Format Library lists the top 3 decks as the topping decks, and that makes sense because it's double elimination as well. So it's not like there's a typical top cut like in a regular Swiss tournament. And so let's just dive in to the number 3 deck, which is Kesha's sort of tomato control list, or just good stuff, as we've been calling it on the channel. And I think this deck is really good, a really, really solid list. It's got, the 3 tomatoes, 2 Sangan, 2 witches, triple Magician of Faith, all-star of this format. There's so many powerful spells you can bring back. You can potentially just hand up your opponent for everything with this card. Also, 2 Mana Bug, very good at popping like the Mystic Tomatoes and such. Triple Mechanical Chaser, the premier beater in this format. Playing a Mass Sorcerer, some people cut this from their lists because it doesn't necessarily do as much in this format as it did in Critter, but it still is a very powerful card. You can also search it off of Tomato if you potentially crash Tomato into something like a Cannon Soldier and then bring out a Mass Sorcerer. That can be really, really good and get you a lot of advantage that way. An interesting thing to note here is that they are playing Summon Skull. Now, a lot of people in this format don't actually play Summon Skull in the sort of tomato good stuff list, because it's just not as powerful as it was in things like Critter and Yugi Kaiba. They're just much better cards in the format that you can play, and there's much more ways to deal with this. You know, you've got the hand rips to rip apart the hand, and that makes any card that needs other cards to bring it out a bit less consistent. However, it clearly did well for Kesha here, and so, you know, maybe more people will try experimenting with this more in the future. As a note, they also did not play Monster Reborn in their spell lineup. I mean, they made it to top 3, so maybe that means that Reborn isn't the most necessary card in this format, but I think that was more just a mistake that they made. They forgot about Reborn. But it still is interesting that a deck not playing Reborn could actually make it this far, as I do think Reborn is one of the most powerful spells in this format. But other than that, their spell lineup is pretty typical. You'll note 3 Mystical Space Typhoon instead of playing Heavy Storms, and I think this is correct. Mystical Space Typhoon is reactive. It can stop your opponent's snatch steals, and also, you know, can snipe a set in the end phase, right? Like if your opponent sets Waboku, Mystical Space Typhoon can deal with that in a way that Heavy Storm cannot. And speaking of Waboku, let's talk about the traps. They've got double Waboku here, triple Trap Hole, Mirror Force, and 2 Solemn Judgment. Now, Solemn Judgment is another card that not everyone's been playing in this format, but I do think it is very good, just like it is in Critter. It just is a bit of a risky pick, and if you are up against something like Burn, this could be really bad for you. But that's what the side deck is for, so I think the Solemn Judgment is good in a lot of matches, and I'm curious to see if more people will experiment with this in the future. Another thing to note here is there is a copy of Painful Choice. Now, there's been discussion of Painful Choice in this format and whether it's actually necessary or not. And in the past, I've sort of fallen on the side where it's not necessarily necessary because there's not as much graveyard abuse you can do in this format. And if you do something like just send a bunch of power spells for Faith, that's really telegraphed and not necessarily the best because you're depriving yourself of a lot of good late game draws later on in the game. But you'll notice that a lot of the topping decks do have Painful Choice in them, and it makes sense. Painful Choice is just a powerful card all around. You don't necessarily need to be using the graveyard setup aspect of it. You can just be using it to deck thin and get powerful cards from your deck to your hand. And so in that way, I do think it's a very good inclusion, and it's a very skill-intensive inclusion, but it's probably a card that everyone should be playing in this format. Now, for the side deck, we've got a standard array of options here. We've got another Solemn Judgment and another Waboku to bring in if the matchups require it. We've got double 7 Tools of the Bandit. This is likely if our opponent's playing Solemn, 7 Tools can be really good at punishing that. Double Heavy Storm against more back row heavy decks. Same with double Giant Trunade. Tribute to the Doomed if they need more removal. Last Will here, likely to pair with the Cannon Soldier in the side deck. In certain cases, card destruction probably for Exodia if they need another way to deal with that. Lodge In for more beating, Man Your Bug for more removal, and Giant Soldier Stone for some defensive options here. Now, Cannon Soldier in the side deck is also very interesting. Cannon Soldier is such a powerhouse in the main deck. It's just being able to close out certain game states in a really convincing way. So most decks do play this in the main, but it worked well for Kesha in the side here, it looks like. So maybe it's not as necessary in the main as people have been playing it. But I think this is a really sick list, and it's a list that you can't really go wrong with if you want to try out Tomato Control deck for yourself in this format. But the second place list by Dump Truck is similar. It's another Tomato Control list. That is also a very good deck list that you can't really go wrong with if you're trying it out in this format. Now, this one is, a bit more standard to how people play Treasure than Kesha's list is. They've got, a lot of similarities with Kesha. They've got triple Tomato, double Sangan, double Witch, triple Magician of Faith here, triple Chaser as well. But they've also got triple Mana Bug instead of double Mana Bug, a Cannon Soldier to bring out off of Tomato or Sangan or Witch to close out some games, and also a Giant Soldier Stone as a defensive option in the main deck. And I do think that having a defensive option in the main deck can be pretty good, as there aren't as many removal options in this format as there will be in formats to come. So I think this is a really good inclusion here. For the spell lineup, it's pretty standard. They've got Change of Heart, Confiscation, Darkhold, Dealing with Duo, Triple Fisher. This can deal very nicely with Mystic Tomatoes, and just other problematic cards that you might run across. For spell and trap removal, they've got Heavy Storm and Triple Mystical Space Typhoon. Also, a very good ratio here. And Heavy Storm can come up in certain game states as well. So while the Triple Mystical Space Typhoon is probably better than just having Heavy Storm over them, Having Heavy Storm in the deck is also pretty nice. They've also got a Monster Reborn, which, as I mentioned, is one of the most powerful spells in the format. They've got a Painful Choice here as well. Again, most of the Topping decks have this, and I think it really is a good sign for the card in this format. Pot of Greed, Raigeki, Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry. And for the trap lineup, they've cut down a bit compared to Ketchup. They've got a Mirror Force, Triple Trap Hole, and a 7-tool of the Bandit, which is kind of interesting to see this over Solemn. But I think it's a really nice sort of inclusion, as you want to 7 tools your opponent's trap holes on your tomatoes or your opponent's mirror forces. And if your opponent is playing something like Solemn, the 7 tools in the main really, really does hurt that a lot. Now, for the side deck, this is where things get a bit interesting. They've got double Banisher of the Light, and actually talking to them after the games that they played in the finals last night, they actually said that they would actually bring this into the main in the future because this card put in a lot of work and can be really annoying for your opponent to deal with, as there are a lot of monsters in this format that really do rely on being sent to graveyard. I mean, you've got your Sangans, your Witches, but you've also got your Tomatoes as well. And also, having Banisher up prevents Magician of Faith from being able to get back a lot of powerful spells. If they've been activated while Banisher's on field, they don't go to graveyard, they get banished. So this card is really annoying for some decks to deal with. And also, 2,000 defense is nothing to scoff at. It can be really tough to get over that through conventional means. So I do think that Banisher is a really neat inclusion here, and I think that it probably will see more play in the future, more experimentation. So I hope people do try it out. They've also got a Jirai Guma on the side to get a bit more aggressive. Double Mass Sorcerer if they want to go into the Mass Sorcerer route. They've got Giant Trinate and Heavy Storm for more back removal. Double Tribute to the Doomed against more flip focus decks can be pretty good, as there's no Nobleman of Cross at this format. They've got double 7 tools and a Solemn if they want to get a bit more counter heavy. And they've also got triple Wuboku here in case they're up against a more aggressive deck. And in the finals, they actually went up against a more aggressive deck. So the triple Wuboku in the side was kind of helpful against that. Though ultimately, it wasn't enough for this deck to beat the topping list here. And the topping list is not actually a sort of good stuff tomato control list. It is actually a Last Will Cannon Soldier list, which is very, very interesting to see here. Very, very innovative to see here as well. And it really shows that this format is nowhere near solved. As, like if you play something like Critter format, that format is largely solved. I mean, there are occasionally the rogue deck that, rises to the top of the ranks, which was the case for the Labyrinthine Turbo deck in the last Critter tournament. But with that sort of deck, you can look at the triple Cannon Soldiers and be like, okay, well, that's more because people are playing Solemn Judgment and you've got triple Cannon Soldier, right? So the triple Cannon Soldiers can really capitalize on all those Solemn Judgments and really deal that last bit of damage pretty consistently. But here, I feel like this deck is good because it's just a really good strategy on its own. Basically, the idea of this deck is that the Recruiters plus Last Will can be a kind of crazy combo because, like, something that will happen a lot in this format is you crash your tomatoes into your opponent's tomatoes, and you just sort of go through all the tomatoes and then end on, like, a Witch or Sangan, or maybe a Cannon Soldier if you want to win that battle. And then that's kind of all you do with that. With the Last Wills, you can both crash a Recruiter and also bring out like another Recruiter from deck. You can bring out like Sangan or Witch, or you can even bring out something like Catapult Turtle or Cancel to potentially go for game. They've also got some other interesting techs for the Recruiter battles specifically, and also to pair with Last Will. If you need to get over something like Mechanical Chaser, Rush Recklessly can be very helpful for that, as you bring out a monster with 1400 attack, and then Rush Recklessly it over a Mechanical Chaser, you can get in for a fair amount of damage that way. And Rush Recklessly also works well with Catapult Turtle, as it can get you a little bit extra damage, which can potentially come up in certain board states. The monster lineup also has a Cyberjar, which a lot of decks are not playing. And I think here it actually is pretty decent because you can potentially do this on your own turn. Flip up Cyberjar, trigger its effect, pop your field, and then Last Will out stuff afterwards. And it can potentially set up a lethal line there. Although it is quite risky, as you are on a little bit of a low monster count, especially if you've gone through your Recruiters already. So it can be a bit tricky to play. So I'm not sure if this deck will remain in future iterations or if it's actually much better than giving it credit for here. But I do think it's pretty interesting, and I'm curious to see what people do with this in the future. But, of course, besides this, there's the Double Magician of Faith to get back powerful spells. And that's going to be pretty much it for the monster lineup. For the spell lineup, there's a lot of the standard power cards: Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Reborn, Raigeki, Darkhold, Change of Heart, Snatch Steal, Delinquent Duo, Comfy, Forceful Sentry, Triple Mystical Space Typhoon, a Heavy Storm, and of course I mentioned the double Rush Recklessly already. There's also, of course, the double Last Will here to facilitate your combo. Not at 3. I guess because it can be a bit of a brick if you draw too many of it. So I think this ratio makes sense. But it will be interesting to see how people experiment with the ratios on all this stuff in the future. For the trap lineup, it's pretty standard. You got a Mirror Force, double Trap Hole, and double Wuboku here. So a pretty small trap lineup, but that's probably all you need, honestly, if you're planning on getting aggressive and setting up a major OTK push in one turn. And the explosivity of this deck is really what catapulted it to success. Like, watching back a lot of Soul's replays in this tournament, they really, just could kill their opponent out of nowhere. And that is the danger of this deck. It really is a very, very scary thing, as there are just so many ways it can kill you. And it's kind of surprising how many ways it can kill you. And it really does show that this deck is a pretty big contender, I think, for the meta in the future. Now, of course, more testing does need to be done. Soul themselves mentioned that in the Treasures final stream, where they said, this deck did well this tournament, but it really needs more testing and more time put into showing off the matches with it to really see what it can do. Also, if people aren't really prepared for this, then that can enable it to win more, kind of like with the burn deck last tournament as well. But once people know that this thing is out there and know that if they see like a Mother Grizzly, then they have to be aware of this deck, then maybe things will change and it'll have a much harder path to victory. But I think this is a really sick deck. Very quickly for the side deck, they've got Maneater Bug, Wall of Illusion. These two act as more removal, I think. You've got double Jiragumo to get more aggressive with their beaters. And Soul actually did bring these in the finals, and they actually did put in a fair bit of work. So this is a pretty good side deck tool. You've also got double Tribute to the Doom to deal with more flip focus strategies. Double Fisher to deal with opponents that are playing more monsters like Tomato and Grizzly. And if they're on a recruiter control deck, then Fisher can be pretty decent in that case. We've also got a Heavy Storm for more back removal, double Solemn Judgment, and double Seven Tools of Bandit in case they're up against a more counter trap focus strategy, and also double Magic Jammer as well to go along with that too. But I think that the main deck here is really the star of the show, and really, really cool that Soul built this and piloted it to a first place finish in the tournament. Very, very awesome to see. And it really gives me a lot of hope for the metagame going forward. I mean, this doing well, Relinquished getting to the top 4. I think that there's a lot to explore here in Treasure format, and I encourage people to do so, because I do think that, like, it has some very, very interesting differences from Critter format, which is probably the popular format that's closest to this in terms of, like, feeling. But there are a lot more strategies that Treasure format enables. And if you like Critter format, but you want to sort of try something new with the metagame of it, I think Treasure format could be a good format for you to test out. But that's going to do it for my breakdown of the results of this Treasure tournament here. Again, I will post the link to the format library, coverage of it in the description here. That also has access to these deck lists. If you want to play them for yourself, you can just download the link from there. And it could be a very good way to get into this format. So I highly encourage you to do that, and let me know down below what you thought of the results of this tournament and what you think the meta for Treasure format will be like in the future. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, please be sure to both like this video and also subscribe to the channel. We are almost at 1,000 subscribers. We're less than 100 subscribers away, and I'd really like to reach that milestone soon. So if you're not already subscribed and you enjoy the content, please subscribe and help us make that happen. But until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.